When Jelena Ostapenko walked off the court trailing 6-2, 3-0 in the second round, the cameras caught something rarely seen in professional tennis: genuine disgust from her opponent. Portia Archer, the 23-year-old Australian who'd been dominating for 70 minutes, didn't offer the customary consoling pat at the net. Instead, she stood motionless, racket dangling, watching Ostapenko pack her bag without making eye contact. The retirement wasn't shocking. Ostapenko has form here, but Archer's reaction was. In a sport built on decorum, this was as close to public humiliation as the WTA allows, and the fallout is exposing uncomfortable truths about player accountability, injury legitimacy, and what happens when competitive fire meets perceived surrender. Archer's first serve percentage through the opening set sat at 73%, a tour-leading figure that put her in the same efficiency bracket as Aryna Sabalenka during her 2023 Australian Open run. Ostapenko, by contrast, landed just 51% of first serves and committed 23 unforced errors before the retirement call, compared to Archer's 7. Those aren't marginal differences, they're the statistical markers of a player being systematically dismantled. The match, held in the second round of a WTA 500 event, drew approximately 4,200 spectators to the main stadium, a sellout driven largely by Ostapenko's brand recognition as a former French Open champion. Within the first 40 minutes, it became clear this wasn't going to be the explosive shot-making duel fans had paid premium prices to witness. Ticket resale data showed courtside seats had traded hands at $450, nearly double face value, anticipation fueled by Ostapenko's reputation for high-drama tennis. The first set unraveled quickly. Archer broke serve in the third game with a clinical backhand pass down the line, then again in the seventh, both breaks coming on Ostapenko errors rather than Archer winners. The 2017 Roland Garros champion's body language deteriorated visibly. Racket bounces after missed forehands, extended arguments with her coaching box, the telltale signs of mental unraveling that have defined her career's inconsistency. By the time Archer served out the set at 6-2, Ostapenko had won just 38% of points on her second serve, a catastrophic figure for a player whose aggressive baseline game depends on dictating from the opening shot. Broadcast partners ESPN and Tennis Channel reported real-time viewership holding steady through the first set at approximately 340,000 combined viewers across platforms, respectable for a second-round weekday afternoon slot. But those numbers tell only part of the story. The second set began with Archer holding comfortably at love, her serve untouchable at speeds averaging 112 miles per hour. Not overpowering by modern standards, but placed with geometric precision that forced Ostapenko into defensive positions she's temperamentally unsuited to occupy. The Latvian's first service game of the second set featured 3 double faults and a forehand sprayed 2 meters wide on breakpoint. At 0-2, she sat during the changeover with a towel draped over her head, refusing to acknowledge her coach's attempted communication. The third game saw Archer hold again to love, bringing the score to 3-0. And it was here that the match effectively ended. Ostapenko stood to serve, bounced the ball twice, then walked to the umpire's chair and announced her retirement due to what was later described in official press releases as lower back discomfort. The crowd's reaction was immediate and hostile. Audible boos cascaded through the stadium, not the sympathetic applause typically reserved for injured players. Ostapenko avoided eye contact with all sections of the stands as she gathered her belongings, her movements hurried, almost furtive. Archer remained at the baseline for a full 15 seconds, visibly processing what had just occurred before walking to the net with her hand extended. The handshake was perfunctory, 3 seconds of contact, no words exchanged, Ostapenko already turning away before Archer's hand had fully dropped. Television cameras captured Archer's facial expression in that moment, and it wasn't the relieved smile of a player advancing. It was something colder, a look that read more like professional affront than sporting sympathy. Post-match, the WTA's medical team reported no visible treatment had been administered to Ostapenko during the match, no medical timeouts called, no trainers summoned between games. Under current WTA rules, a player who retires from a match forfeits all ranking points for that tournament and receives prize money only for the round reached, not the round they would have played had they withdrawn before the match began. For a second-round exit at a WTA 500 event, that's approximately $15,000 versus the $8,000 she'd have received for a first-round withdrawal. The financial incentive to play, even briefly, exists within the system's structure. Streaming data showed that once Ostapenko's retirement was confirmed, viewership dropped by 62% within 10 minutes. Audiences abandoning the broadcast in numbers that cost networks advertising revenue calculated in 6 figures per incident when aggregated across a season. Archer's press conference was measured but pointed. "I prepared to play a full match," she said, declining to comment directly on the retirement's legitimacy. "I was playing well today, and I think that was clear to everyone watching." That phrase, "everyone watching," carried deliberate weight. She didn't question Ostapenko's injury explicitly, but the implication hung in the air. If this was legitimate physical distress, why did it manifest only after falling behind 6-2, 3-0? Why were there no visible signs of struggle with movement, no wincing, no adjustment to serving motion? Statistical analysis of Ostapenko's movement patterns through the match, tracked via Hawkeye data, showed no reduction in court coverage speed or change in split-step timing that would indicate acute back pain. Her average rally speed remained consistent at 4.2 seconds per point through both sets, suggesting no physical limitation in lateral movement. The incident immediately became the most discussed moment of the tournament, generating over 87,000 social media posts within 6 hours, according to analytics tracking major tennis hashtags. Comparison sentiment analysis showed 73% of coded responses expressing frustration or skepticism about the retirement's timing, 18% defending Ostapenko's right to protect her health, and 9% neutral or unclear. That ratio is significant when measured against typical player injury retirements, which generally generate 40 to 45% sympathetic responses and only 25 to 30% skeptical reactions. The gap suggests public perception registered this as different, as something beyond the standard occupational hazard of professional sport. For Archer, the victory, if it can be called that without irony, represented her biggest career result to date, advancing her to the 3rd round of a WTA 500 for the first time. Her ranking, sitting at number 67 before the tournament, stood to climb into the top 55 with the points earned, a crucial threshold for direct entry into Grand Slam qualifying without needing protected ranking status. She'd entered the tournament as a lucky loser after falling in the final round of qualifying, the randomness of a late withdrawal giving her a second chance that she'd seized with ruthless efficiency. Against Ostapenko, she demonstrated not just superior execution, but superior composure, the kind of professional maturity that separates journeyman players from those who break through to sustained tour-level success. The ranking mathematics tell the first part of this story. Archer earned 60 ranking points for reaching the 3rd round, points that vaulted her from number 67 to a projected number 56 in the live rankings, pending other results that week. That 12-spot jump might seem modest, but in the WTA's brutally compressed middle tier, where rankings between 40 and 80 are separated by fewer than 150 points total, it represents substantial progress. More critically, breaking into the top 60 grants automatic entry into WTA 500 main draws without requiring wildcards or qualifying campaigns, reducing travel costs and physical wear that accumulate over a season. Prize money calculations compound the advantage. Direct main draw acceptance at WTA 500 events guarantees a minimum $10,000 for first-round losers, compared to the $1,200 earned for qualifying final round losses. Over a full season, that access differential translates to $80,000 to $120,000 in additional base earnings before accounting for any match wins. For Ostapenko, the consequences are both immediate and reputational. She received $15,000 for her second-round appearance, but sacrificed the 60 points she'd have earned for reaching the 3rd round, plus the cumulative points available from deeper progress. Her ranking dropped from number 23 to number 28, a slide that matters significantly as the season approaches its final months and players calculate their positioning for year-end championships and Grand Slam seeding. At number 28, she sits outside the top 24 seeding positions for majors, meaning she could draw top 8 opponents as early as the 4th round rather than being protected until the quarterfinals. That's not abstract tournament theory. It's the difference between a winnable path to the second week and running into Iga Swiatek or Sabalenka when legs are still fresh and surfaces favor the dominant. But the deeper damage is accumulating in databases that track player reliability, metrics that don't appear in official WTA statistics, but are monitored closely by tournament directors, broadcast partners, and sponsors. This marked Ostapenko's fourth mid-match retirement in the past 18 months, a rate that places her in the 97th percentile of tour regulars, meaning only 3% of players who compete in at least 20 events annually retire from matches more frequently. Compare that to the tour median of 0.8 retirements per season, or to players like Ons Jabeur and Jessica Pegula, who've each retired once in the past 3 years, despite playing 25-plus events annually. The pattern suggests something beyond normal injury misfortune. It suggests a player whose threshold for competitive adversity sits lower than professional standards expect. Tournament organizers track these patterns because they directly impact business operations. When a marquee name retires early, especially in a lopsided match that suggests the result was inevitable, it triggers ticket refund policies that cost events 6 figures per incident. The specific tournament where Archer Ostapenko occurred reported processing 340 refund requests totaling $87,000 within 24 hours, all from fans who'd purchased tickets specifically to watch Ostapenko and felt defrauded by the abbreviated match. While tournament insurance covers some of this exposure, repeated incidents with the same players strain relationships. Multiple tournament directors, speaking anonymously to trade publication Tennis Majors, acknowledged maintaining informal reliability ratings that factor into wildcard decisions and appearance fee negotiations. A player with Ostapenko's talent would normally command $50,000 to $75,000 in appearance fees for WTA 250 events. Her actual fees now hover closer to $25,000 to $40,000, the difference representing a quantifiable reputational discount. Media coverage metrics reveal the incident's unusual resonance. Within 48 hours, the retirement generated 127 distinct articles across tennis-focused and mainstream sports outlets, a volume typically reserved for Grand Slam quarterfinals or major controversy. Broadcast partners reported that highlight packages featuring the retirement moment accumulated 2.3 million views across YouTube and social platforms in the first week, dwarfing the 340,000 viewers who watched live. That inverted ratio, posthumous attention exceeding live engagement by a factor of 7, indicates the incident achieved viral status beyond tennis's core audience, penetrating into general sports discourse where tennis typically struggles for attention outside majors. For Archer, the professional validation arrives on multiple fronts simultaneously. Within 18 hours of the victory, her management agency fielded inquiries from 3 racket manufacturers and 1 apparel brand about potential endorsement deals, interest that hadn't existed when she was ranked outside the top 60. The mechanics of tennis sponsorship are brutally tier-based. Players ranked 50 to 100 might secure $15,000 to $30,000 annually in equipment deals with performance bonuses. Breaking into the top 40 can triple those base figures and unlock 6-figure apparel contracts if the player demonstrates marketability beyond pure ranking. Archer's composed response to Ostapenko's retirement, declining to publicly criticize while letting her facial expression communicate volumes, showcased the kind of media savvy that brands value as much as forehand winners. Australian media attention spiked measurably. The Sydney Morning Herald, Melbourne Age, and national broadcaster ABC all featured the match prominently, a level of coverage Archer hadn't received since her junior career. In a market where women's tennis competes with Australian rules football, rugby, and cricket for sports media oxygen, that visibility carries tangible value. Her social media following increased by 14,000 across platforms in 1 week, modest by influencer standards, but significant for a player previously hovering around 8,000 total followers. Engagement rates matter more than raw numbers in sponsorship evaluations. Brands track likes, shares, and comments as proxies for authentic fan connection, and Archer's posts about the match generated engagement rates of 8 to 12%, well above the tour average of 3 to 5% for players outside the top 30. The contrast in fan sentiment between the 2 players emerged starkly in post-match social media discourse. Sentiment analysis of geotagged posts from attendees at the venue showed 81% expressing support for Archer and frustration with Ostapenko, compared to typical match reactions where sentiment usually splits closer to 60 to 40 in favor of the winner. That 20-point gap represents a collective judgment that this wasn't simply one player outperforming another, it was a referendum on professional standards and competitive integrity. Fan forums and tennis subreddits dissected the retirement for days, with highly upvoted comments focusing not on whether Ostapenko experienced discomfort, but on whether that discomfort rose to the level justifying mid-match abandonment when losing badly. The distinction matters. Professional sport accepts that athletes play through minor pain routinely, and the question becomes where the line sits between acceptable toughness and reckless self-endangerment. Ostapenko's retirement pattern invites uncomfortable comparisons to other talented but volatile players whose careers have been defined as much by what they didn't finish as what they achieved. Nick Kyrgios, the most obvious parallel from the men's game, retired from 8.3% of his career matches between 2018 and 2023, a rate that eventually cost him wildcards to prestigious events despite rankings that technically qualified him. Bernard Tomic, another Australian whose talent never fully materialized into sustained success, retired mid-match 13 times between 2015 and 2020, developing a reputation that made tournament directors reluctant to extend invitations regardless of ranking. Both players possess skill sets that could trouble anyone on tour. Kyrgios' serve remains one of the sport's most devastating weapons. Tomic's courtcraft in his prime was sublime, but their inability or unwillingness to grind through adversity capped their career trajectories below what pure talent suggested possible. The women's game has fewer recent examples of chronic retirement patterns, partly because the WTA's depth and competitive balance mean falling behind. Early doesn't guarantee inevitable defeat the way it often does in men's tennis. Players like Victoria Azarenka and Simona Halep, who've dealt with legitimate chronic injuries throughout their careers, average 1.2 retirements per season over their careers, but typically retire early in matches when it's clear they cannot continue, not after losing the first set badly. That distinction matters in public perception. Retiring at 1-3 in the first set reads as genuine physical crisis. Retiring at 6-2, 3-0 reads as competitive surrender with medical justification attached. Historical data on mid-match retirements across the WTA over the past decade shows approximately 3.2% of all tour-level matches end in retirement, a figure that's remained relatively stable despite increased attention to player health and more sophisticated medical support. The timing distribution of these retirements is revealing. 41% occur in the first set, 33% in the second set, and 26% in the third set or beyond. Ostapenko's retirements skew heavily towards second sets when she's trailing badly. 3 of her 4 recent retirements came in the second set after losing the first decisively, a pattern that sits in the 8th percentile of typical retirement timing. Put differently, 92% of players who retire from matches do so with timing distributions that look more random and less correlated with score deficits. Compare Ostapenko's approach to mental toughness exemplars who've defined different eras. Rafael Nadal has completed 98.7% of all matches he's started across his career, retiring only when physically incapable of continuing and often playing through visible pain that would sideline lesser competitors. Serena Williams, across a 27-year professional career, retired mid-match just 6 times, and 5 of those came after age 35 when accumulated injuries made some matches physically impossible to finish. More relevant to current WTA comparisons, Iga Swiatek has never retired mid-match in her professional career despite playing 200-plus tour-level matches, demonstrating that modern players can navigate full seasons without abandoning matches except in genuine crisis. Archer's composure under the awkward circumstances finds parallel in other emerging players who've had to navigate opponent retirements while maintaining professional decorum. When Coco Gauff's opponent retired during the 2023 US Open third round, Gauff handled it with grace that drew praise from commentators and enhanced her reputation as a mature young professional. Emma Raducanu, during her improbable 2021 US Open run, faced an opponent retirement in the second round and used the abbreviated match to conserve energy for deeper rounds, demonstrating tactical awareness beyond her years. These moments test players differently than pure competitive battle. They require navigating disappointment, fan frustration, and the hollow feeling of advancing without truly earning it, all while cameras capture every reaction. The financial consequences of retirement patterns become clear when examining long-term endorsement trajectories. Players who develop reputations for toughness and reliability command premiums that extend beyond their ranking-based market value. Simona Halep, even as her ranking declined into the 20s during injury struggles, maintained endorsement deals worth $6 to $8 million annually because brands trusted her professionalism and competitive commitment. Conversely, talented players whose careers are interrupted by frequent retirements or behavioral issues see sponsorship values crater. Ostapenko's current endorsement portfolio, estimated at $800,000 to $1.2 million annually, sits well below the $3 to $5 million range, typical for former Grand Slam champions with her name recognition, the gap representing what industry insiders call the reliability discount. Historical attendance data shows that players with retirement patterns see measurable drops in their draw power over time. When Maria Sharapova or Venus Williams was scheduled for a stadium court match, tournament directors could reliably expect 90% plus capacity regardless of opponent. Ostapenko's current draw power sits closer to 70 to 75% capacity, a figure that correlates with fan uncertainty about whether they'll see a complete match. Post-match survey data from multiple tournaments reveals that fans rate likelihood of seeing a complete competitive match as the third most important factor in ticket purchasing decisions, behind only quality of players and importance of round. Once a player develops a reputation for frequent retirements, that third factor works against them in ways that suppress ticket demand measurably. The contrast in coaching approaches offers another layer of analysis. Archer works with a coaching team that emphasizes mental conditioning and scenario preparation as much as technical refinement, an approach increasingly common among emerging players who've studied the careers of mental toughness exemplars. Her post-match comments consistently reference process over outcome and controlling what I can control, the linguistic markers of modern sports psychology integration. Ostapenko's coaching relationships, by contrast, have been notably unstable. She's worked with 6 different coaches in the past 4 years, a turnover rate that suggests either difficulty finding the right fit or challenges with receiving critical feedback. Players who change coaches frequently often struggle with consistency because they never fully integrate a coherent tactical and mental approach. The business mechanics of professional tennis create perverse incentives around match retirements that most fans never consider. Players who withdraw before a tournament begins forfeit their entry and receive no prize money, making the financial calculation favor showing up and playing at least briefly, even when not fully fit. A player who competes in one round and retires in the second still collects first-round prize money. A player who withdraws beforehand gets nothing and potentially damages relationships with tournament directors who allocated main draw spots based on their entry. This structure inadvertently rewards players for starting matches they're unlikely to finish, creating situations precisely like Archer Ostapenko, where fans pay full price for abbreviated entertainment. Tournament directors face a no-win scenario with high-profile but unreliable players. Ostapenko's name recognition and Grand Slam pedigree make her an attractive draw for marketing materials. Casual fans recognize her brand and are more likely to purchase tickets when she's featured. But that marketing value crumbles when she retires mid-match, triggering refund obligations and generating negative press that damages the event's reputation. Some tournaments have begun adjusting their approach, offering reduced appearance fees with reliability bonuses built in. Pay the base rate up front, then additional compensation if the player completes all matches or withdraws before taking the court. These structures remain informal because the WTA prohibits official reliability-based payment discrimination. But the mechanisms exist in gray areas of appearance fee negotiations. Broadcast partners experience the most direct financial impact from unexpected retirements. Networks pay rights fees based on projected viewership, calculated from player draw strength and expected match quality. When a featured match ends in retirement after 70 minutes instead of the projected 2+ hours, commercial inventory goes unsold, and programming schedules require real-time adjustment. For major networks like ESPN, which might charge $40,000 to $60,000 for 30-second spots during prime tennis broadcasts, losing an hour of programming costs 7 figures when aggregated across a season. These losses get factored into rights fee negotiations, creating downward pressure on the money available to compensate players at all levels. Social media engagement patterns reveal how retirements affect the sport's digital presence. Complete matches generate sustained engagement, fans post reactions throughout, highlight moments accumulate views gradually, and discussion threads remain active for days. Retirement controversies, conversely, spike engagement immediately then fade quickly, the discourse focusing on the controversy itself rather than tennis quality. The Archer Ostapenko retirement generated those 2.3 million highlight views, but 84% of the views came within 48 hours, and comment sections focused overwhelmingly on Ostapenko's decision rather than Archer's performance. That's engagement that doesn't build long-term fan investment or grow the sport's audience. It's rubbernecking rather than genuine interest. Sponsorship deal structures are increasingly incorporating language around player conduct and reputation management, reflecting brands' awareness that athlete behavior can enhance or damage their marketing value independent of performance. A typical mid-tier endorsement contract now includes clauses allowing brands to reduce compensation if a player's public reputation materially diminishes due to behavioral factors unrelated to competitive performance. That language deliberately avoids penalizing players for poor results. Losing is inherent to sport, while creating leverage if a player develops a reputation for tanking, frequent retirements, or conduct that generates negative press. Ostapenko's existing deals almost certainly include such provisions, and her recent retirement pattern gives brands justification to invoke them if they choose. The WTA itself faces strategic challenges in addressing retirement patterns without appearing unsympathetic to legitimate injuries. The tour operates in an environment where player health and well-being receive unprecedented attention, making it difficult to implement punitive measures for mid-match retirements without facing accusations of forcing injured athletes to endanger themselves. Yet, the current system's lack of meaningful consequences creates moral hazard. If retiring when losing badly carries no penalty beyond forfeited ranking points that wouldn't have been earned anyway, some players will inevitably abuse the system. Proposals circulate periodically for reforms: mandatory medical documentation within 24 hours of retirement, financial penalties for retirements not accompanied by tournament withdrawals for the following week, or suspension from prize money pool participation if retirement rates exceed tour averages. None have been implemented, partly due to player union resistance and partly due to enforcement complexity. Fan trust metrics, tracked through periodic surveys commissioned by the WTA and individual tournaments, show a concerning trend. In 2019, 76% of surveyed fans reported high confidence that professional tennis matches would be completed once begun. By 2023, that figure had dropped to 68%, with the decline concentrated among fans who attend multiple events annually, the core audience that drives ticket revenue. Qualitative responses indicate frustration with paying premium prices for matches that end in retirement, a sentiment that manifests in reduced willingness to purchase early round tickets at full price. Some fans now adopt a wait-and-see approach, monitoring matches in progress and purchasing secondary market tickets only after matches are clearly being completed, a behavior that reduces advanced ticket revenue tournaments depend on for operational planning. Media narratives around retirements reveal tensions between player advocacy and sporting entertainment. Tennis journalists generally avoid questioning injury legitimacy directly, both because they lack medical expertise to make such judgments and because maintaining player access requires avoiding adversarial relationships. Yet the careful language in articles about the Archer-Ostapenko match signals skepticism. Phrases like "Ostapenko cited lower back discomfort" rather than "Ostapenko injured her lower back," or "the retirement came after a challenging first set," rather than "the retirement came due to injury," reflect journalistic awareness that not all retirements are created equal. That linguistic hedging communicates to readers that doubt is appropriate without the publication risking defamation liability or player access. The economics of women's tennis remain precarious enough that reputation damage from retirement controversies carries outsized consequences. The WTA's total prize money in 2024 topped $200 million for the first time, a figure that sounds substantial until compared to the ATP's $350 million or professional football's billions. Every instance of negative press about player reliability or match fixing or any factor that diminishes the product's integrity makes it harder to justify increased investment from broadcasters, sponsors, and host cities. Tournament directors operate on thin margins. Most events outside the Grand Slams generate profits of just 5 to 10% of revenue after covering prize money, operations, and facility costs. Anything that suppresses ticket sales or complicates broadcast relationships threatens event viability, which ultimately reduces playing opportunities and prize money for all players. Archer's ranking trajectory projects favorably through year-end if she can maintain the form demonstrated against Ostapenko. Breaking into the top 55 grants automatic entry into all WTA 500 main draws, meaning she'll compete in roughly 12 to 15 tour-level events over the final months of the season without needing to qualify. Tournament exposure alone should generate another 150 to 200 ranking points, even with modest results, potentially pushing her into the top 45 by December. That ranking band becomes critical heading into the 2026 Australian Open. Players ranked 35 to 50 receive favorable seeding in Grand Slam qualifying, facing lower-ranked opponents in early rounds and dramatically increasing their odds of reaching the main draw, where even a first-round loss pays $100,000. The psychological momentum from beating a former Grand Slam champion, even via retirement, provides intangible benefits that statistics struggle to capture. Sports psychology research consistently shows that breakthrough results against higher-ranked opponents create lasting confidence effects, changing a player's self-perception from "I hope to compete with top players" to "I belong in matches with top players." Archer's comments after the match reflected that shift. She spoke about her game plan working exactly as prepared, about executing under pressure, about feeling in control throughout. That internal narrative matters as much as the ranking points in determining whether she can sustain this level or regress to previous patterns. For Ostapenko, the path forward requires addressing either the underlying injury issues that force retirements or the competitive mindset that makes retirement the default response to adversity. If legitimate chronic back problems exist, proper treatment and potentially reduced scheduling would be the professional approach, playing fewer events, but completing those entered, preserving reputation and fan trust. If the retirements reflect mental fragility rather than physical limitation, the solution involves sports psychology work that's every bit as important as technical coaching. The concerning pattern is that Ostapenko's retirements cluster specifically in matches where she's being outplayed, rather than distributing randomly across competitive and non-competitive situations, suggesting the trigger is psychological rather than purely physical. Her Grand Slam seeding situation creates urgency around the ranking slide. At number 28, she's uncomfortably close to falling outside the top 32, the threshold for avoiding top players until the third round of majors. The difference between a number, 25 seed, and a number 33 ranking can literally be the difference between a fourth-round appearance and a first-round exit. Seeded players draw unseeded opponents early, while unseeded players might face number 1 seed in round 1. With approximately 180 points separating those ranking positions, and most points from last year's tournaments falling off her ranking over the next 3 months, Ostapenko needs deep runs immediately to maintain seeding status. But deep runs require completing matches, creating a circular problem where reputation damage from retirements might be affecting her mental approach in ways that make retirements more likely. The head-to-head future between Archer and Ostapenko carries narrative weight beyond typical tour rivalries. If they meet again, and ranking projections suggest a 40% probability of another encounter within the next 12 months, the dynamic will be freighted with subtext about their first meeting's conclusion. Ostapenko might feel compelled to prove the retirement was legitimate and that she can compete with Archer when healthy. Archer will carry confidence from having dominated the first encounter and knowing that mental toughness gives her an edge. These psychological factors often matter more than pure shot-making ability in determining outcomes between evenly matched players. Sponsorship trajectories for both players will be monitored closely by their management teams and competing brands. Archer represents exactly the profile that equipment and apparel companies covet for emerging player investments, ranked high enough to generate visibility, young enough to provide long-term value, professional enough to represent the brand well in media settings. If she stabilizes in the top 40 by year-end, she's looking at contract offers in the $75,000 to $150,000 range for racket or string deals, and potentially $200,000 plus for apparel if the brand sees her as a cornerstone athlete rather than just a roster addition. Those figures might seem modest compared to Swiatek's $20 million endorsement portfolio, but for a player who earned just $140,000 in prize money in 2024 before this breakthrough, they represent life-changing financial security. Ostapenko's endorsement outlook is more complicated. Brands typically sign multi-year deals with options for renewal based on performance and conduct clauses. Her current contracts likely run through 2025 or 2026, meaning she has time to rehabilitate her image before renewal negotiations become critical. But brands are already calculating the risk-reward ratio of association. Her volatility generates attention, which has marketing value. But if that attention is predominantly negative, it becomes a liability rather than an asset. The next 12 months will determine whether she's viewed as a talented but frustrating enigma worth the investment, or an unreliable headache better left unsigned. The WTA's institutional response to retirement patterns likely won't manifest immediately, but will influence policy discussions over the next year. The Tour's Player Council and Tournament Board meet quarterly to review competitive regulations and address issues affecting the Tour's business health. Retirement rates and their impact on fan experience and broadcast partnerships will almost certainly feature in those discussions, potentially leading to the reforms mentioned earlier: enhanced medical documentation requirements, financial structures that more clearly differentiate between genuine injury and strategic abandonment, or transparency initiatives that give fans better information about player health status before purchasing tickets. Fan behavior evolution represents perhaps the most significant long-term implication. If casual tennis fans begin assuming that early-round matches featuring volatile players might not be completed, they'll adjust purchasing decisions accordingly, either paying less for those tickets in secondary markets or skipping them entirely in favor of later rounds featuring more reliable players. That behavioral shift would create a two-tier market where established, reliable players command premium ticket prices while talented but unpredictable players see their draw value decline regardless of ranking. Over time, this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Players whose reputation suffers receive fewer opportunities in prime stadium slots, reducing their visibility and further damaging their marketability. The Archer-Ostapenko retirement crystallizes tensions that professional tennis has struggled to resolve for decades. Where does legitimate injury protection end and competitive accountability begin? The sports culture has traditionally erred on the side of player health, accepting retirements at face value and treating questions about their legitimacy as breaches of professional courtesy. But that deference creates vulnerabilities that players can exploit, intentionally or subconsciously, when matches become uncomfortable or defeat feels inevitable. The challenge is designing systems that protect genuinely injured athletes while discouraging those who use medical retirement as an escape hatch from difficult competitive situations. Ostapenko's talent remains undeniable. Players don't win Grand Slams without elite shot-making and mental strength when those qualities align. But her career is drifting toward becoming a cautionary tale about unfulfilled potential, a reminder that tennis demands more than physical gifts to sustain success. The sport's grinding nature, its brutal travel schedule, its format that exposes every weakness over best-of-3 sets with no teammates to hide behind. All of it requires psychological resilience that some players never develop regardless of their technical prowess. At 27, she's young enough to reshape her legacy. But the window is narrowing as younger players like Archer arrive with complete games and the mental toughness to outlast adversity. For Archer, this moment could define her career trajectory if she leverages it properly. The ranking points and prize money matter, but the professional reputation she's building as a player who competes with focus and class regardless of circumstances might prove more valuable long-term. In a sport where margins between top 50 and top 20 players are often mental rather than physical, establishing yourself as someone who finishes matches and handles awkward situations with maturity creates opportunities that pure ball striking cannot. Sponsors want athletes who enhance their brand. Tournament directors want players who deliver value to fans. Coaches want students who maximize their potential through mental discipline. Archer demonstrated all those qualities in 70 minutes against Ostapenko. The broader question for the WTA involves confronting uncomfortable realities about player responsibility and fan expectations. Tennis markets itself as elite athletic competition where the best player wins through a combination of skill, strategy, and mental fortitude. When matches end in retirements that appear strategically timed rather than medically necessary, the product feels diminished, the competitive integrity questioned, and fans rightfully feel cheated. Yet the solution isn't simple. Forcing injured players to continue risks serious harm, while penalizing retirements too harshly creates perverse incentives to hide injuries and play through damage that worsens with competition. Perhaps the answer lies in transparency and cultural shift rather than rule changes. If the tour clearly communicated the medical basis for retirements, not immediately, but within reasonable timeframes that respect privacy while informing fans, it would help distinguish genuine injuries from competitive surrenders. If coaches and veteran players more consistently emphasized the professional obligation to complete matches whenever physically possible, it might shift norms around when retirement becomes acceptable. If tournaments offered ticket holder vouchers good for future sessions, when featured matches end in retirement, it would acknowledge fan frustration without penalizing players for legitimate injuries. These aren't perfect solutions, but they'd be steps toward addressing the disconnect between player autonomy and fan experience that incidents like this expose. The incident also reveals something about tennis's cultural evolution in the age of social media and instant reaction. 20 years ago, a second-round retirement would have generated a brief mention in next-day newspaper coverage and faded from memory within 48 hours. Today, it becomes a viral moment, dissected frame by frame, with Archer's facial expression analyzed as if it were a political debate reaction shot. That heightened scrutiny cuts both ways. It holds players more accountable to public standards of conduct and effort, but it also creates pressure that can make the mental side of competition even more challenging. Every decision gets second-guessed by thousands of commentators, many with no understanding of the sport's physical demands or the legitimate unpredictability of injury. What made Archer's reaction resonate wasn't anger or overt criticism. It was the visible processing of professional disappointment. She'd prepared thoroughly, executed her game plan brilliantly, and earned a decisive victory. Yet the moment felt hollow because it was incomplete. That's the frustration every player feels when denied the satisfaction of finishing what they started, of proving themselves over a full match rather than benefiting from an opponent's exit. Her composure in that moment, standing at the baseline, absorbing the situation before walking to the net with hand extended, spoke to a professionalism that veteran observers recognized and valued. She wanted to win, but she wanted to win completely. The debate questions this incident raises deserve serious consideration from everyone invested in women's tennis. Should the WTA implement stricter retirement penalties, perhaps requiring players who retire mid-match to provide medical documentation within 24 hours or face fines and potential suspension? The challenge with such rules is enforcement complexity and the risk of punishing legitimate injuries, but the current system's lack of meaningful consequences enables abuse. Would tournament-level medical transparency help, making basic information about retirements available to media and fans without violating player privacy? Something like Player X retired due to documented lower back strain confirmed by tournament medical staff versus the current vague statements. That might help distinguish genuine injuries from convenient exits while respecting medical confidentiality. Does Ostapenko's talent and occasional brilliance excuse her volatility and retirement pattern, or does it damage the sport's credibility in ways that outweigh her positive contributions? This question gets to the heart of how professional sports balance individual player rights against collective product integrity. Every sport has talented but difficult athletes who generate attention through skill and controversy alike. But tennis's individual nature means one player's retirement affects more people directly – opponent, tournament, fans, broadcasters – than in team sports where substitutes can fill in. The community standards for reliability necessarily sit higher when there's no backup, no teammate to pick up slack, no coaching staff to manage the situation. Perhaps the most important implication involves what this moment teaches emerging players watching from qualifying draws and junior circuits. They see Archer's professionalism rewarded with advancing and recognition, her composure becoming part of her professional brand. They see Ostapenko's talent undermined by inconsistency, her Grand Slam title increasingly viewed as an outlier rather than the foundation of sustained excellence. The lesson isn't subtle. In modern professional tennis, mental toughness and reliability aren't optional supplements to physical skill. They're prerequisites for sustained success. The players who build lasting careers and financial security are those who show up, compete fully, and finish what they start, regardless of score or circumstance. The Archer-Ostapenko retirement will fade from immediate headlines as new controversies and compelling matches capture attention. Tennis moves quickly, and the tour's relentless schedule ensures yesterday's drama becomes tomorrow's footnote. But the dynamics it exposed remain relevant every time a player retires, every time fans question whether they're watching genuine injury or competitive surrender, every time tournament directors calculate the risk of featuring unpredictable athletes in prime slots. These tensions won't be resolved by a single policy change or cultural shift. They require ongoing conversation about where the balance sits between player welfare and professional obligation, between individual autonomy and collective product integrity. What's certain is that Portia Archer emerged from this match with more than ranking points and prize money. She gained recognition as a player who handles adversity and awkwardness with equal professionalism, who competes with focus and finishes with class. In a sport where reputation takes years to build and moments to destroy, she built hers measurably in those 70 minutes and the composed 30 seconds that followed. Ostapenko, conversely, added another data point to a pattern that's increasingly defining how the tennis world perceives her, not as the fearless ball striker who won Roland Garros, but as the talented enigma who too often chooses exit over battle when matches turn difficult. The questions linger. When does protecting your body become protecting your ego? When does accepting defeat demonstrate wisdom rather than weakness? And when you walk off a court trailing badly, are you preserving yourself for future battles or forfeiting the respect that only comes from fighting through present ones? These aren't questions with universal answers, but they're questions every professional athlete confronts, and how they answer shapes not just individual careers, but the integrity of the sport itself. Tennis demands excellence, certainly, but it also demands endurance, resilience, and the willingness to finish what you start. On that afternoon, against Jelena Ostapenko, Portia Archer demonstrated all three. Only one of them did.